And here we are on Ways and Means, still that committee, February 12th. It is 1:20. And we are continuing our work on the governor's proposed budget, which will eventually turn into a letter that we will send to the Appropriations Committee. And we're going to finish our testimony from Andrew Stein, the Chief Operating Officer at the Department of Taxes. And then we're going to go through the beginnings of a memo that Chris Roop has created for us. And then at 2:30, we are switching gears and doing a bill introduction on H418. That's the plan for the day. Also, fair warning, we are going to schedule a little bit of committee tomorrow at 1 o'clock. By fair warning, I mean not that much fair warning. It's only 24 hours warning. Because we just have a lot of bills piling up that need to move along with their lives so as not to create problems for the Appropriations Committee. So with that, Andrew, would you like to sit in that lovely chair and take us through the rest of your budget presentation?
Thank you all.
We are going to, maybe we'll let you go through the presentation and just ask clarifying questions for a while.
Sure, yeah, and if there are any particular topics you want me to.
We'll probably want to spend more time on your movement around the pilot funds.
Sure.
But
Happy,
it's all of interest.
happy to. All right. Andrew Stein, Chief Operating Officer of Taxes. Thanks for having me back. Is it okay to share my screen now?
Yes, please. Thanks.
Excellent. There. I have the budget book with you. Okay, so last time we left off here, and I sent along an overview of childcare contribution revenues by quarter. Did you all get that? Great.
Yeah.
One question, Representative Holcomb, you had asked was about health insurance. And the way that is budgeted, I can only answer some of this because a lot of this is handled by DHR and Finance and Management. But essentially, DHR has an actuary that projects next year's rates based on a range of information. And based on those projections and based on our employees' existing coverage, and for vacant positions, there's now a new estimate that's in the new budgeting system. The state has a new budgeting system. Bless you. And so as part of this new budgeting system, all of the insured values for our employees and insured values for vacant positions are pre-populated. So that's all in there. That's aligned. So when I get the budget for salaries and benefits, that's all kind of baked in there already. So that all comes from DHR and Finance and Management. So that's just high level to answer your question. And I'm not certain, I'd have to look, I'm not certain off the top of my head what the difference is between this year's premiums and the projected premiums, but that is something that, and frankly, the Joint Fiscal Office should have access to that information. So if you want information on that, they can dig into it. They probably have it already. All right, so we'll get back to the presentation. Actually, I think we ended on this slide, our employee engagement metrics, spotlight on success. And then we have, these are some key performance metrics that we rely on at the department and have been part of the department's performance management budget for like 10 years now. And so this is personal income tax administration overview of performance, 3 key performance indicators here. Erroneous refunds prevented. That's not all fraud. Frankly, fraud is a small slice of this, but this is really good work that our department, that our tax examiners and tax analysts do. Most people are trying to follow the law and they make mistakes. And if they weren't flagged, and if our team didn't work with them to help taxpayers amend their returns, it would cost the state an additional $11.8 million last year. So that's something that we like to track. Timely filed refunds issued within 45 days of the due date. So that's typically June 1. 95%, that is our goal. That's what we try to hit. We've hit it the past 4 years. I remember years ago when I was an analyst and our former commissioner was the VTAX director, we got pulled into a meeting with the deputy commissioner and some other directors about personal income tax refunds. And at the time, that number was in the 70 percentile. And so we looked at how can we improve this. We created this, we have this weekly report, this weekly huddle. So we look at things together. We have our taxpayer services division, our finance division is a cross-departmental group. And every year we work to refine things, streamline things so that we can get money back to Vermonters quicker than ever before. And in the past 10 years, there's been a massive expansion of tax credits, earned income tax credit, child tax credit. Really, the list goes on. Even just last year, there was quite a robust expansion. And so our work in this space is more important than ever. Like 75% of Vermonters who file a tax return as part of personal income taxes get a refund. So we take this very seriously. It gets money back into people's pockets quicker. And so refunds issued within 30 days of filing, that actually dropped off a little bit. Not thrilled about that, but we do generally understand why that happened last year. There were some delays related to withholding data which delayed W-2 processing, and we do all sorts of validations with W-2s. We had a vendor approval issue early in the season with one large vendor who didn't meet all the necessary criteria. When I talk about vendors, I'm talking about like the Intuits, the H&R Blocks, the Thomson Reuters, the tax preparer software companies. And we do there's a lot of back and forth to make sure that their software is accurately calculating Vermont's return information and works with our system. So I can say that all of them are approved for the personal income tax season so far, except for there might be one. There's one that typically gets approved way later, but all the big ones are approved this year. So that's positive. And yeah, so it was a little bit of a drop off. I'd like to see us get back to where we were last year. Property tax credit. This is a big one. Property tax adjustments granted. Frankly, we use this as part of our performance management budget, so it's here. I don't really view this. This isn't an indication of our department's performance, but it is interesting to see year over year what happens here. And last year, the threshold was down significantly in terms of who received the property tax credit and who didn't. What that really means is the intersection of who would benefit from their taxes being calculated based on the income sensitivity calculation, who would benefit was down past year. So it was more beneficial for people to pay property taxes than based on income sensitivity. So that's due to, and I would defer to somebody like Jake Feldman to explain this in much greater detail. Or
we actually just talked about it with Julia yesterday.
Julia, exactly. You have some great analysts at JFO who can explain this much better than me at this point. In terms of erroneous credits prevented, this is similar to what we were just talking about before. This is our system identifies issues, and then we have analysts and examiners go in and work to resolve them. So that's helpful in terms of education fund and general fund dollars. That's significant. And then claims that require manual review. That's an indication to us as to, how clear are our forms and how tuned are our systems. The less returns that require manual review, the better from our perspective. And we're at about even 17%. Renter credit, big change in terms of credits granted. Again, I don't really view this one as this first one as a benchmark of our department's performance. It could be if we were really behind in issuing things, but we haven't been. I do look at credits issued within 60 days of filing as a key performance metric here. Again, we have the erroneous credits prevented, but credits issued within 60 days of filing. Calendar year 24 was big, 96%. And in 2018, that number was down around 35%. So we made steady gains to get there. And we backtracked last year. And there were a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons why we backtracked last year was because we hit the appropriation. And so when we hit the appropriation, we needed to work with finance and management. We were able to resolve the issues within a week or so, but moving outside of that 60-day window, wasn't it? So we dropped out there. Current use, big up in terms of applications processed by April 15th, from 17% to 75%. It's huge. There's a couple of things. Calendar year 24 was down particularly low. It would have been closer, I believe it would have been in the 50% percentile, but we had to delay a couple of weeks because we were in the middle of a system transition. So we couldn't have those applications processed by April 15th. If we would have used like May 1 as the benchmark, we would probably be looking at a difference of like 50 some percent to upper 70s or lower 80% CY24 to 25. But a big change really is we have a new head of current use, Michael Ramsey. He was formerly the town manager of Killington, before that of Proctor. He's a great get for our department, wonderful guy, wonderful supervisor. And we also have a really dedicated, talented current use team that wanted to improve in this area. They all worked together to make some major gains in the past year. So I view that as major improvement year over year. We also, again, we shifted our current use application system from an older legacy system to, in December, the BTAX system. So hoping to make headway there in the next few years.
The average days to process applications, those are first time applications?
I believe those are first time applications. Yeah, I'd have to look. That's a very good question. I believe it is. I don't believe it's, I believe those are only first time applications for those ones. I can get back to you.
What was the year that TurboTax had a problem with Vermont returns? Was that like 5 or 6 years ago, or is that just 2 years ago?
No, I would say there have been a number of issues over the years, but they are very responsive and typically great to work with to resolve those issues. Nobody gets it perfect. Are you talking about there was a big IN 155 issue years ago. That was like back in 2017 or 2018.
Okay, all right. I remember there was a big, I can't remember if it was that household income?
That was the IN 155 was, I believe, for when there was some changes in apportionment. I'd have to look at that again.
Okay.
Yeah, that was back from when I was an analyst, but there was a big issue back then. But there are, frankly, I'll just speak from personal experience, not as the COO of tax. My partner and I rely on Intuit for our taxes, and a couple of years out of the past 5 or 6 years, there have been some issues as a result of some calculation problems in that software. Not huge issues, just we're still using it. It works for us, but yeah. So not gonna advocate, or just speaking from personal experience. So I'll keep going. So this, I'm not going to go over this here, but what we did is we put together slides that provide status updates as to where we were with regard to legislative mandates. This is just from last year. Every year we have a big, what we call it the legislative build. You all pass policy and you all pass legislation and we have to build it. And so there's a lot, but really there's a lot every year. And so just for the budget presentation to comply with the new requests from the appropriations committees, we just took a snapshot based on 1 year. That's what we're planning to do moving forward. But you can go and take a look at all of the legislation that we're required to implement year over year. We provide that every single year frankly, we rely on it as a department, that webpage regularly, but
The last few years, I've really appreciated what a great partner tax has been in suggesting legislation and really collaboratively moving those things forward so that they're sort of meeting your administrative improvement goals and your administrative capacity limits. So,
yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
So vacancy rate. Frankly, this is higher than I'd like to see. A 5-year narrative of our vacancy rate, from my perspective, would be when I came in to this role in early 2021, our vacancy rate was rising. There was a lot of attrition then, a lot of turnover, a lot of, that was an interesting time for everybody. And there was a lot more turnover than than I can think of at any other point in the department's recent history. And so later that year, we put together a recruitment team. At the time, our vacancy rate went up to like 25%. We were like, we really need to address this. And so we had a recruitment team, and Craig was already very focused on employee engagement. The entire leadership team was very focused on employee engagement. And so we were able to get this vacancy rate down to like between 5 and 6.5% pretty consistently for several years. But last fiscal year, it started to grow primarily due to our compliance division. Those positions are really difficult to recruit for all states. They're really difficult for us to recruit. Frankly, while we did just have a class action RFR to bump up the pay grades for our auditors, and those are really difficult to recruit for positions, and other states pay a lot more than we do, and the private sector pays a lot more than we do still. I have been asked about what do I think about market factor adjustments. The state auditor's office has them, DFR has them, many departments and agencies do. I personally don't love them. I think our classification system is very, very antiquated, and it's really, really ripe for replacement. And the fact that our state classification system doesn't account for the labor market unless you have a market factor adjustment, I think is problematic. And it creates these inequities. That said, if we continue to really struggle in this space, I feel like all options should be on the table. We'll have to figure out exactly the budget for that. But yeah, outside of our compliance division, our vacancy rate last year was between 0 and 5% consistently.
How do you navigate the competing pressures between sort of an across the board administrative use of vacancy savings as sort of like a budgeting tool and your desire to have a complete healthy
I would
force?
love to get our vacancy savings down to about 5 to 6.5%. We have bumped up our vacancy savings over time because we've had them. So it's like to make our budget work. That said, if we had like a 0 to 3% vacancy rate, that's a problem that I'd like to have and would have to figure out how to handle that over time.
There been, and I know we've been talking about replacing the Wella system for about 20 years now.
Mhm.
Is there any serious effort to get that?
I would defer to DHR on this, but my understanding is yes, DHR and probably the secretary's office could respond to that better than I can. I understand that there is an effort right now underway. I would love to see that happen.
I mean, the market rate adjustments really create, the level of inequity that they create is, I understand that it's a necessary solution in some cases, but it's really not.
Even within one department, even like when I was at the state auditor's office, even between just two positions, when you'd get a promotion and the promotion would move you into a position that had a market factor adjustment, that change was huge. So the inequity between two positions where the qualifications were just a little bit higher creates issues. Yeah, no doubt about it. But I don't fault departments and agencies for working with the tools that are available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hire the talent that they need. So I definitely appreciate that. Our vacancy rate is trending down, but it's not as significant as I'd like to see so far this year. We are reclassifying a number of vacant positions to better meet department needs, and that does leave positions open longer. Especially when you create a new position, it takes quite a bit of time with our existing classification system. It takes months. So we might know, like, we really, when a position becomes available, we want to reclassify it, but the process that it needs to go through, it's quite lengthy.
Oh, sorry.
No. Other states, even other states like Massachusetts, my understanding, talking with our former commissioner, are able to take positions that they currently have and turn them into different positions pretty quickly. And I do think that if state government, if departments and agencies had that ability, they still need to manage their own budgets. They need to figure out, how to make ends meet. No doubt about that. But I think if departments and agencies had that flexibility, and I have to imagine the union would be open to that flexibility. I'm getting outside of my lane here, but I think it would be very helpful for the future of state government to have a bit more flexibility in that space. To take, say, a position that becomes available that was very clerical before, and you turn it into a position that is, works with software systems and is steeped in accounting skills, et cetera.
Do you, the sort of pool of folks who left the IRS, have all of those folks found jobs now, or are you still finding that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I do know that we have, our new audit manager came from the
Yeah, you
IRS.
said that, and I just wondered if there was more. Sort of,
We've had some IRS folks apply for some of our positions in the past year. I haven't seen as many lately, but that doesn't, I'm not quite as,
you're not,
I'm not tied into every recruitment that we have going on right now.
I want to make sure that you can get through your whole presentation.
Sure, well, I will, really, the rest of my presentation, for the ups and downs here, I provided a summary last time of this. So I just keep moving along. And if you all have any questions in the future, happy to answer that. Carry forward. There's not too much to discuss here. We actually chatted about it last time as part of like what was rescinded. So really the main thing that I'd jump to, and I'm going to keep going, would be what are referred to as our grant appropriations. And that gets into what you asked about before, Madam Chair. So I'm just trying to get it.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, into the grant appropriations, is that grants in, grants out?
It's all out, and I really refer to them as grants because it's this. What these are. Well, I'll go through each one. How about that?
Sample, whatever it could be.
Yes. Yeah. So payment in lieu of taxes is one of those appropriations.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, which I really don't view as a grant, but it is budgeted for as a grant because they're disbursements out of state government, not for our operating budget. Exactly. So 12.2 million is the budget request. The prior year amount came in less than forecasted. And so this year, the forecast came in at 12.2 million. So pilot for correctional facilities. This is like an enhanced pilot for those communities that have correctional facilities. It's been level funded for years. 40,000. The homeowner rebate is down 1.5 million, and this is due for the same reasons that we reduced the homeowner rebate in the BAA. This is the disbursement to municipalities from the general fund to make them whole for those taxpayers who receive property tax credits under the circuit breaker, so under $47,000.
Yeah.
So when they receive that assistance on the municipal end, the municipalities are made whole with these general fund disbursements. Above that, it's just foregone education fund revenue. This is the reappraisal and listing payments. And this was in the general fund. And we proposed shifting it to the pilot fund as part of fiscal year 27. And the House Appropriations Committee seemed to like that proposal and decided to proposing to shift it. I understand it's already passed the House, it's with the Senate now, so.
Budget adjustment.
Yeah. So this same proposal was just moved forward a year from FY 27 to FY 26. It's still in FY 27. And there's four main components to this. There's an $8, here, let me get out the trustee sheet on this.
We're actually like in pretty active conversations about what these numbers should be in the future as part
Yes.
of the regional assessment district.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important conversation to have. Let me just add all this paper. I'm not used to having this much paper. Apologies. Well, I can rattle it off the top of my head. How about that? So the $8.50 per grand list part payment per parcel payment to municipalities is for reappraisal costs. Of course, they can use it for whatever they want, but it's for reappraisal costs. Then there's a $1 per parcel payment that is for assisting the state with the equalization study. There's $100,000 for a Lister education program that PBR administers. And there's $70,000 for grand list litigation assistance for utility valuations. That's used for all sorts of things. In the past, it's primarily been used for dams, but also methane digesters. We propose keeping this for now. At some point in the future, I could see it shifting to the commercial appraisal and litigation assistance program. But for now, we're keeping this here.
Are you imagining, I guess I'm curious about sort of the decision to use the pilot fund, like how you would explain the nexus. And if you're imagining that like this is a permanent home or just like a convenient home.
Well, I think it ultimately would depend on in the future what the legislature and administration decide to do with reappraisal. So, I know there's this proposal like $66 per parcel. And with everything else currently in the pilot special fund, the pilot special fund would get spent down pretty quickly. Of course, it's growing because there's new local option tax municipalities coming forward. And I'm not certain what the legislature is going to decide to do. Legislature and governor is going to decide to do around these 2% municipalities. And there's proposals in the Senate around using that money for other purposes. But in general, I think the nexus is that these are appropriations to support municipalities. And so coming out of the pilot fund, which is funded by local option taxes, when there's more money there, the idea was that's the nexus. These are municipal disbursements. Put them there, save the general fund money. I would frankly defer to Finance and Management and Commissioner Gresham, who ultimately, this proposal came from Finance and Management. We assisted and we said, yes, we think this can work for the foreseeable future, but I would defer to them on, but the general nexus is these are municipal payments and this is funded by municipal tax, a slice of municipally generated local option taxes. And it's in a fund to make municipalities whole that is currently doing that as payments in lieu of taxes, and there's surplus funding here.
Yeah.
Okay, where else do the funds come from for this pilot? We talked about the local option tax. And
That is, yeah, it's 30%. So essentially there's an administrative fee that we assess $5.96. And then the amount that remains, 70% goes to the municipality, 30% goes to the pilot special fund. Oh, sorry, 75% goes to the municipality, 25%. This just changed on October 1st. Sorry, I'm dating myself. Yes, 25% goes to the pilot special fund.
596 is per return that's filed by the filer, the business.
It is, the way it actually works is if you have it works a little bit different if you have like a remote seller, for example, who's remitting on behalf of a bunch of municipalities, it's per return for that municipality. So if there's 3 municipalities, that 596 is being used 3 times. And that's always been the case. Our former software system and current software system, it's really kind of the only way to do it. If you think about it, how would you apportion that $5.96?
Right.
You know what I mean?
If I have a store in Williston, one in Burlington, one in Killington, they all have options taxes, then you have to divide them all up.
Yeah. So, and right now in terms of what's in there, and I know Chris has an updated version of a spreadsheet that he and I worked on earlier in the session, but you have your general pilot, your correctional facilities pilot payment, you have in fiscal year 26 and Newport and Springfield correctional facilities payment, which is an additional $152,000 coming out of this. You have the municipal grand list stabilization program, which is to make municipalities whole who have buyouts associated with flood prone properties. In fiscal year 20, that's a $1 million appropriation that carries forward automatically. In fiscal year 26, it's about $82,000, that appropriation. And the max that we think it will be in FY 27, of course, we don't know what we don't know, is $200,000. My guess is it's going to be less than that. We've got the telecoms valuation project that we talked about as part of the BAA. That's coming out of that $150,000 in fiscal year 26. Well, we're asking for all of it now, but I think $150,000 is what will actually get charged in fiscal year 26. And then there's the AOT town highway non-fed disasters money, which is like $1.5 million now, and then reappraisal and listing payments. So that's all there. And we anticipate that revenues are going to grow. The balance will start to be spent down with all of this, but with this current portfolio.
So when you say the balance will be spent down, do you mean that you don't anticipate the fund could manage this as an ongoing?
I think it's something that we'll have to look at. I think it likely will be able to. Let me look. I'd like to look at the updated figures from, or it might make sense for Chris to come up here with the updated figures. And I'm happy to chime in from the sidelines, because I think it's likely that with this current mix, it probably can. But we don't know what we don't know, but like we're looking at like 7 additional municipalities voting on lot. It doesn't mean it's going to pass. It doesn't mean their voters are going to go for it. But if you have 4 to 7 new municipalities coming online year after year, of course, it depends.
Eventually they'll.
Yeah.
Run out of-
You run out of municipalities, and really the big ones
Yeah.
will,
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, so.
But there are some in there that I think will bring in some more money, both for them and for these funds. So I think it's more than conceivable that, the fund balance will go down year over year for the next 5 years or so. And then I think it's conceivable that things could level off and it could be a sustainable source of funding. Because essentially it's getting spent down. Right now, expenditures are greater than revenues coming in for the next several years, but we're anticipating that revenues will grow. We just don't know by how much, because we don't know where it's going to pass. I will say, I did take a look at that.
I feel like we have a lot of special funds that are, their revenues are not meeting their expenditures, and
Yes.
seems dangerous to
Yeah, I
set
hear
ourselves
you.
up a new one.
Yes,
Okay,
I share your concern.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to touch on anything else here, or do you want to shift it over to Chris on?
Anyone else have anything?
Well, okay, so there were 2, there was $40,000 for the correctional
Yes.
facilities, but there's over
Pilot.
152.
Yes, yeah. So Newport and Springfield Correctional Facilities, that doesn't come out of our budget. That's what I did was I got all of the expense. I wanted to make sure that it would work for us to administer the pilot special fund. So I worked with others to pull together those other appropriations. Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
You like me to stick around a little longer for Chris's? Yeah.
I mean, but you don't have to if you have something else to do, but it would save us having to chase you down if we have.
I'll stick around.
I'm not gonna make you explain these. Well, so.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh,
I wouldn't know what I'm talking about.
It's a theme today.
Hello, everyone. Chris Roop, Joint Fiscal. Madam Chair, would you like me to start with just walking through that pilot sheet
Sure.
that Andrew mentioned? Okay.
We can go to the other sheet.
Right. Share this. And I'll send this to Sorcia to post later. It's in public and other committees, but I don't think you've seen it yet. All right, so with the great help of my colleague from the tax department, who you just heard from, we updated a outlook for FY 26 and 27 for the pilot fund to give you all a sense of the recent appropriations out of it, as well as the anticipated expenditure level. Because some of those appropriations, as Andrew mentioned, are one-time appropriations that are expected to be spent down over a period of years. So just to orient everybody on row one here, the pilot fund ended FY '25 with a surplus of $15 million. And in FY '26, those first three rows 2, 3, and 4 are sort of your annual recurring obligations that come out of the pilot fund to make pilot payments to towns. There is also, you will remember the one-time $1 million for the municipal brandless stabilization program. The telecom, $500,000 you see there from the BAA. I highlighted these cells in yellow because they've changed as a result of the BAA. You might remember that last year, the transportation budget shifted. There's a line for town highway non-federal disasters that's carried in the budget every year of 1.15 million. Typically, that's funded by T funds. In FY '26, on a one-year basis, that was switched to the pilot fund to free up that T fund for other things. Subsequently, AOT was able to pay 2 additional towns. I think it was Norwich and Pomfret for 2 additional projects. And finance and management had allowed them to spend an additional $360,050 through excess receipts out of the pilot fund with the understanding that V-Trans would identify ways to pay the pilot fund back that $360. Given the status of the different funds and their relative strengths right now, the House did not agree with that approach to make the agency pay back the pilot fund. So the pilot fund absorbed that $360,050 increase just in FY '26. And then that money that would have otherwise gone to pay the pilot fund, about 70 of it went into the general fund, for 70,000 went in for other things in the BAA, and about 292,000 remained in the T fund, which is currently projected to end the fiscal year in the red. So that helps them a little bit on that. And then you'd see that 3.41 million on line 8 that Andrew mentioned, appropriated in B139 for all of those town-related, municipal-related grants. The House BAA had advanced that construct to begin in FY '26, and that freed up some space in the general fund to deal with some other things. Senate Appropriations voted out the BAA earlier this week. It's all starting to blur together now, but that concurred with that construct that the House proposed. So when you factor all this in and you factor in what tax projects some of the expenditure activity to be, and I think they project pretty conservatively on this front, the fund would end FY '27 with a surplus of about 11.6 million. So something to keep in mind is that there's still a pretty healthy surplus that would be higher than the 10.3 million that the fund ended FY '24 with. I also want to point out that the number on line 11 about pilot revenue, Andrew mentioned, that's likely to tick up in the future, and it's hard for us to get a really good handle on that till after town meeting, but that number is likely to grow. So, in the immediate term, the expenditures are dipping a little bit into the surplus, but we expect the cash flow to start, balancing out in the future. I did just want to point out that the construct that's in the BAA and the GovRec around reappraisal and listing payments, the legislature, if things got tight in the future, could always change its mind on how to fund these costs. Every year the Appropriations Committee figures out how to make things balance by shifting money from fund to fund. That's a solvable problem. And it would be less disruptive than, altering the balance of payments that go out to towns or changing the revenue allocation or anything like that. So that's just the high level context of where we are on the pilot fund right now. Even with these additional costs going in, the fund still is in decent shape for the near future. So unless you have any questions on that, I'm going to switch to another document. Sorcia was kind enough to post a big summary chart that prints on legal size paper. And every year, just to remind everybody, the Appropriations Committee puts a memo together, sends it out to all the policy committees, and asks you all to look at different sections that are within the committee's jurisdictions. And then they ask you all to respond to the House Appropriations Committee by, in this year, the deadline is next Friday, with your thoughts. So to begin that conversation, what I've done here, just like I've done in the past, is I went through the governor's recommended budget language and just combined all the sections and the annotations into one cheat sheet for you all to work off of. And based on your reactions to this, that can then inform a memo that the committee can then send to House Appropriations. So this is really just a starting point of the conversation so I can walk you through the sections of language that are being proposed and how it all sort of ties together in the big picture. So the numbers at the top here, all these B numbers, those are the base appropriations, and Andrew already walked you through most of those. So these are the appropriations to the tax department, as well as the things involving pilot. The one thing with the corrections payments that I think you pointed out, Representative Kimball, is there is another pilot appropriation for correctional facilities that doesn't show up on this list because it gets routed through the Department of Corrections budget. So there's going to be a note in here that is a breadcrumb that leads you to that appropriation and explains that. So D100 every year. The other thing I just wanted to point out here, other than, the numbers are the numbers that Andrew walked you through, the most significant thing that's notable is on B139, that 3.41 shifting from the general fund to the pilot fund. It's a change in funding source. And there's going to be a whole lot of accompanying language sections that I'll get to that relate to that. D100 is the annual property transfer tax allocation language. The consensus revenue forecast estimates property transfer tax to be $82 million this year. It has held up pretty well so far. This can be a tax that can exhibit a lot of volatility in the economy. Other than the estate tax, PTT is probably like one of the most volatile tax types. We have not seen a whole lot of volatility in this yet. The consensus revenue forecast has not made any sort of downward revision that's notable, and we expect it to keep ticking up by about 3 million a year. But it's something to keep an eye on if conditions change. I don't know if anybody has any questions on the PTT allocations, but the minor notwithstands in here really have to do with the fact that tax doesn't need as much money as the statute would give them. And ACCD had requested some different allocations on how some of the money in sub-bullet 3 is allocated to meet up with actual demand. So D101, A1C, and A3A are transfers from the.
Sorry, Chris. Yeah, for somebody.
What's the nexus between the tax department and ACCD?
There's no nexus between, other than the fact that they collect the tax, they get a piece of the property transfer tax, and a piece also goes to the municipal planning. And there's a whole allocation here of where the money goes. Some of it goes to VHCB, but since
And that's on
tax item, yeah.
Yeah. but I'm
PTT gets
just-
divided up.
So if there's extra for the tax department, it just
So
all goes to.
this is a very, very complicated issue, but I would suggest you read the annotations, but the statute says a certain amount of money has to go to the current use administration special fund that PVR uses. They don't need as much money as the statutory allocation would send to them. So that's why that section is not withstood. Then, pieces go to the general fund. Some of it goes to VHCB. And then some of it goes out to regional planning activities, municipal planning, and also to ADS for the Center for Geographic Information. So every year there's a process where they look at what are the actual needs are versus what does the statute say the money should go to. And there's often notwithstand language to more neatly align the appropriation authority to where the need actually is.
And the RPC money goes through ACCD.
Yeah.
Is that, okay.
That.
Yep.
I just want to make
Okay.
sure that
Yep.
the decision wasn't suddenly being made, oh, there's extra here, we'll take it.
In a perfect world, all taxes would go into a major fund and be subject to appropriation, but that's neither here nor there. I wanted to point out a few other things that I don't think are very spicy, but just want to draw your attention to every year in the D101s, which are the fund transfers, you'll see transfers from the general fund and to the ed fund to the tax computer system modernization fund. That's because the computers at tax are used to collect the revenues that go to these funds. Fairly straightforward, but I wanted to make sure that when you see that, you understood what it was. D101A1D, this appears very straightforward in the bill, but there's a little bit going on here. That $114.9 million proposed transfer from the general fund to the education fund, there's two components of that. 10 million of that reflects the governor's proposal to move general fund to the ed fund to essentially pay for the cost of reducing purchase and use tax to the ed fund by $10 million. The remaining $104.9 million would be intended for buying down property taxes. But these don't show up as two separate discrete lines here. It shows up as one rolled up total. So I just wanted to make sure you knew what was going on behind that number.
And as we figure out what we're doing with both of those funds, we would engage with those two topics separately, and we would with the appropriations committee about those as two separate topics. And in both cases, it is fine with the chair of the appropriations committee if we say we are still figuring out really big picture important questions with those funds. Please just leave that money alone for now. Because that is due, the letter is due long before our yield bill is due.
Right, so, Chris, I understand the 104.9 and the 10 million. There's also an ominous 22 million that appeared.
Ominous?
Well, only because I don't know where it came from.
Oh, okay.
22 million.
Yeah.
It's a surplus from last year.
Oh, that.
And it's
Oh, okay.
Oh,
20 million
it?
is lower than what it was last year. Last year it was 40.
that sounds right.
It's good. Okay.
That sounds right.
And leftover cash on hand that we. because
Yeah, there was-
we didn't spend.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of money that was intentionally sort of fenced off at the end of 26 to roll over into 27. So
That and the 22.
I think that's part of that, yeah. And there was some of it was due to the revenue forecast upgrade that happened as well.
And Julia will run through it all again on Tuesday.
Okay, I should ask that. Sorry.
Yeah. But our budget folks have looked at the numbers and they add up. How you choose to use the money is up to you, but.
Thank you.
I'll move over to the language sections now. So some of this stuff will sort of dovetail with the other items I just mentioned. Some of it's new, and there's a couple sections here that all sort of relate to each other. So I'm going to try to point that out. E139, grand list litigation assistance. This is really standard annual language. What's different this year is that this highlighted piece, notwithstanding 32 VSA 3709A, that is to facilitate paying this cost out of the pilot fund. And 32 VSA 3709A, that's the pilot fund statute. So anytime you deviate from that, that statute is typically not withstood. That is the first of several items related to this shift of that $3.41 million cost over to the pilot fund. E142, this language is standard annual language. Nothing to see there. It shows up every year. E142.1 changes statute around the payments that the tax department makes for lister and assessor education. This is also included in that $3.41 million appropriation. Statute said this had been paid out of the ed fund. In reality, it had been paid out of the general fund. So this proposed change aligns statute to the proposed construct moving forward. E142.2 amends that pilot fund statute I mentioned earlier, 32 VSA 3709, to add a few more allowable uses that Andrew had mentioned when he was here. And those allowable uses are, so subsection 3436E refers to that lister and assessment education, that $100,000 appropriation we just talked about 90 seconds ago. 4041A refers to the $8.50 per parcel payments to towns to reappraisal and listing assistance. And 5405F refers to that dollar per parcel payment for the equalization study. So this is just technical cleanup to sort of align everything in this construct.
And any changes that we make to regional assessment districts likely would not be for this next fiscal year anyway. So as people are thinking about this piece.
Yeah, and I'll also just point out that I'm not entirely sure if the Appropriations Committee is going to want to be this specific as recommended in statutory revisions or just make these expenditures subject to the funds that they're being appropriated of. So it's an ongoing conversation. E142.3, same cleanup that we'd mentioned. This is the section about the $8.50 for partial payments. 142.4, again, same type of cleanup to specify that the equalization study, that $1 per parcel payment comes out of the pilot fund. E144 is standard annual language, no changes from last year. E306.2 and E306.3, if you look at the language as it appears in the budget and this giant word salad of session law references, it's really confusing to see what this is, but it's an issue that this committee's looked at previously. This relates to extending the sunset on the Health IT Fund. So I believe it was just last year, the sunset was extended by a year. The administration is proposing an additional 1-year extension. And just
Folks, I'll just jump in and say, like, this shouldn't be in the budget. It should be in our miscellaneous tax bill as it usually is. And so we can save that conversation for that bill.
and I think my colleague Nolan has come in and explained how all this works. This is where the healthcare claim, piece of the healthcare claims assessment goes.
I have a quick question. Can I ask a question? on
You
this?
might.
So early on, just so you know, the administration didn't have a practice or basically miscellaneous or budget, but there were questions at the beginning of this piece. We noticed some years it's in one and some years the other. Does this committee have a preference for?
We prefer any tax related
Okay.
policy, which is what this is, or really any any tax related policy to be in the miscellaneous tax bill. Last year, we actually didn't have a miscellaneous tax bill, so we farmed out everything that would have been in it to another bill, and that's part of the.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just full transparency at the, when this, and there's several different, I understand, right? The health IT fund and how far, I think the governor's was 1 year, I think this committee had 2 years,
I think it's 5.
5 years, okay. That's helpful, that's helpful for us to keep in mind. In the future, we went back and forth, we're like, we think this makes more sense to budget, but.
All right. Chugging along. So E338 references that standard annual language about Newport and Springfield's extra pilot payments that comes out of the corrections budget, not out of the tax department's budget. No change there from prior years. So now we're getting away from the pilot fund and going to the next sort of knotted up issue. And this is related to the proposal to fund school construction using windfalls from, for lack of a better word, from the estate tax. You all remember that windfalls from the estate tax, if they're in excess of 125% of the July forecast and that the stabilization reserves are fully funded, that money goes to the higher ed trust fund under current law. And the proposal before you is to shift that from there to the school construction aid special fund. There's also just a technical correction in here to reflect that. We don't appropriate money from one fund to another fund. We transfer money from one fund to another. You're also going to see companion language to E501.3 show up a little bit later in this document, but it's sort of a package deal. E516 and
Oh, yeah.
The dumb procedural question, because this is in the budget, though, this is a one-time. deal.
No, this would be a,
Perpetuity.
this is an amendment to statute, so this would be
Okay,
ongoing.
well, there,
So on another proposed amendment to statute that was in the budget, E5,
Another thing that we know that most of you don't like.
E516 and 516.1 are related, and this goes back to the phase down of the purchase and use tax to the ed fund. So this language would propose to step down by $10 million a year the amount of money from this revenue source that goes to the ed fund, therefore going to the T fund by default. And by fiscal 2031, no money from the purchase and use tax would be going to the ed fund. So it's a phase down over a period of years. So E606, this goes back to that thing I was just mentioning about windfalls with the estate tax. This language would amend the statute on the Higher Education Trust Fund to remove those estate tax windfalls as a funding source for the Higher Ed Trust Fund, since the prior language would put that money in the school construction aid special fund instead. There's one other item that was in the language that's revenue related that I wanted to draw your attention to. The administration had proposed some language to stipulate that interest earned in the T fund should remain in the T fund. Current practice had been that interest goes to the general fund. It is not a huge revenue source due to the cash flows of the T fund. The folks we've spoken to in the administration estimate that, given where rates are today, which are sort of higher than they've been in the past, this was about $1.06 million. I think you'll likely see some discussion around not making this type of change go live in FY27, but perhaps delay the effective date by a year so as not to blow a hole in the budget and require people to cut general fund, because if this were to go live, things would not be fully balanced. So I just want to make you aware of what that is. This is not, you might be used to seeing in the consensus revenue forecast and the way we've talked about interest, it being like this big revenue source. A lot of it is due to like the average balances in the cash flow of the different funds. So the T fund is a sizable fund, but it doesn't have a really big average balance, just given its cash flows. It currently gets interest from its stabilization reserve and from impact fees and on the tip, but this is not tens of millions of dollars.
If by contrast, can you just say how much interest is earned off the general fund?
It's well into the tens of millions. Without looking at the forecast right now, I want to think it was like around 50 million recently. Like it went from being nothing to being like the 5th or 6th largest revenue source to the general fund. And it's been steadily declining as the state's cash balance has been spent down. And that's what was expected.
Representative, question, make sure I got this right. So the new, E606, going forward, only new transfers made by the General Assembly would go to that higher ed endowment trust fund.
There is one additional revenue, yes, and there's one additional revenue source that goes to the higher ed trust fund that's not in this section here, and that is a piece of unclaimed property. You'll actually hear more about this when you take up H567, which is currently on your wall. But the trust fund does get a small amount of money. It's, I think it was $147,000 last year from unclaimed property that's under $100 in value and more than 10 years old. So this is a really, really minor revenue source to the higher ed trust fund, but you're going to hear more about this issue when we take up H567.
All right, thank you. So what's already in that my higher education endowment trust fund will stay. It's just the new monies that used to go into it under a formula wouldn't be going into it.
This is only about the revenues going into the fund. Yeah.
New revenues.
There are other conversations that are not in this,
Not in our committee.
not in our committee about the money that's in the
Yes.
fund right now. Yes.
Oh.
Which,
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay.
which, like, there are lots of reasons to have lots of opinions about, but are just not in the committee or in the
I
site.
want to be sure that I get that going forward. I think they're not gonna close out the fund with the funds that exist in it now and use that.
We're not proposing to do that.
No. And the they is
The administration?
My mind ran, okay.
So when Secretary Saunders came in
She
the,
mentioned,
this afternoon,
yes.
this was why she came in, was to pitch this proposal.
I heard it.
Yeah.
Sentence that was a,
Yes.
like a throwaway sentence, and so she kept going to the next thing.
Well, that was why she was here. And
Oh,
and then we took testimony a couple weeks ago about how profoundly unstable a revenue
Right.
source, maybe the most unstable of all revenue sources.
I heard all of those things.
Well,
I
yeah,
just wanted to see.
David Share from the treasurer's office presented in House Ed 2 weeks ago now, I think it was, that around the time that we went to the joint session that Ed and Commerce had about it. And so that it's been 2 years out of the last 10, I think, that there actually hasn't been any
Checks out.
revenue that's gone in from excess estate tax. And so, yes, there was a windfall.
Yeah, it took like 20 years to get like the first 26 million contributed and then the balance like doubled in 1 year.
Yeah,
So it's,
Yeah.
it's very,
And it was, yeah,
but the chances are that it could be years and years before any more money goes in there.
if we're systematically that far off in estate tax, we need to seriously revise our revenue forecast.
Well, that's the point, is that it's an excess above the forecast.
Yeah.
So people have talked about, well, the population's aging, we may end up with more estate tax coming in, and that's true, but then the forecast is also going up. So it really is just the windfalls beyond our estimates.
Yeah, it's really hard to predict when people are gonna pass away and when their estates are gonna be settled.
Yeah.
There's one other item I wanted to mention.
Thank you.
You all last year had asked for $148,000 of one-time appropriations to support the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. The legislature did put that request into the budget in FY '26 under the one-time appropriations. It is not included in the FY '27 GovRec.
and everything that we heard from Andrew about all of the really incredible work we've done on tax credits over the last few years, all the changes that we're planning to make and all the stress around property taxes, like these are the folks that help people navigate that. I'm happy to take more testimony from VITA, from the folks who actually implement VITA, if anyone wants to hear that. But I know the request is for us to sort of round this up to 150 going forward. Yeah, Roman, what was that?
This is, I've used the program, it's incredibly utilized in my team too, so. Very high priority of my team.
It might just be helpful to remind us who the testimony was from, so we can go back and watch testimony or see the presentations from last year, because there were a couple.
It's the community action agencies and
Yeah.
search, I can pull it up and send it around, but we.
Rather than having to drag that back in.
Yeah.
Yes, I think they'd probably find it a pleasure, but yes, we could do it twice, yes. Yes, Representative Reagan.
But, we're paying the volunteers?
No, but volunteer, I don't know if you've ever organized a volunteer, Representative Brannigan, but organizing volunteers costs money too, and training volunteers costs money. And so that really small amount of money is divided amongst every single district in the state, every county in the state in order to implement the volunteer training program.
So it really does cost that.
Yeah, it's a pretty robust program. We can take more testimony from them.
Who's asking me about interest income? Was that you, Representative Kimball, or?
Perhaps.
In FY '25, interest was 58.3 million to the general fund. '26, it's expected to be 40.9, '27, 27.5, then it goes down to 26.5 and sort of hovers around there.
Yeah, going down as the ARPA monies are expended in that kind of stuff.
Exactly. The state's cash balance is going down and interest rates have been creeping downward as well. The treasurer's office has done a really good job of locking in pretty decent rates whenever they can.
Transportation fund by comparison is not much.
Not much. And, the transportation fund doesn't get a slug of hundreds of millions of dollars of federal money upfront to then spend out over many years. It operates more conventionally. Revenues come in every month, revenues go out pretty predictably, and the feds reimburse us on a pretty regular basis as costs are incurred.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chris? Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Any further testimony anyone would like to take? Setting aside the yield bill purchase use conversation, where I will ask for testimony separately. But for people who want to learn more about VITA, not necessarily take testimony on that, and everything else feels, okay. Great. Let's take a 2-minute break while our next group of witnesses arrive. Here we are in the Ways and Means Committee room still. It is still February 12th, 2:30. And we are going to hear about H418. And first up, we have our colleague Rep. Arsenault, the sponsor of the bill. If you'd like to join us.
I thank you. So welcoming. Oh, you're short though. I see how you roll.
Lower chair.
Hi, everyone.
Oh.
Fair enough. For the record, Angela Arsenault, representative from Williston. And I just have a few notes on H418. So happy that you'll be having a discussion about this bill today. So here I am, very proud to sponsor H418 and to present the bill to your committee today alongside advocates for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. As you may know, H418 would create an 11% excise tax on firearms and ammunition to increase revenue for Vermont's existing domestic and sexual violence special fund. The question before us today is not whether domestic and sexual violence services or state funding to support them are necessary. Thankfully, Vermont answered that question in 2008 when the legislature established the special fund to support these essential services. The question that has so far remained unanswered, however, is how we fund them in a way that is sustainable, rather than continuing to rely on one-time appropriations to fill the perennial deficit. Every year for the past 10 years, there's been a deficit in the special fund, and the legislature has made a one-time appropriation to ensure that community-based domestic and sexual violence organizations don't have to cut services for survivors. Despite these efforts, the special fund is once again in deficit this year. There is a clear structural revenue problem that we need to address. But as is true in most cases, we don't necessarily have to invent a solution all by ourselves. We can look to other states and the federal government for examples of firearms excise taxes and how they function. Under this model, the tax is applied to the retail sale of firearms, firearms parts, and ammunition, and is paid by the firearms dealer or ammunition vendor at the point of sale or background check, not by the purchaser. We also know that firearms impose significant costs on our society, and that the majority of domestic violence homicides are committed with a firearm. At the same time, the firearms industry has seen record-breaking profits since 2020, the very years when the revenue to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund has declined most sharply. So I ask that this committee consider H418 as a potential solution to this fund instability and work with JFO to explore what a measure like this would mean for our state.
Thank you. Any questions for Rep. Arsenault? Thank you very much.
you.
I appreciate it. And I will say, we often have folks come and say like, here's a problem, here's a deficit, fix it. And I appreciate you actually finding a revenue source for said deficit. So thank you for that.
I enjoy finding solutions. And I love it even more when many people agree with those proposed solutions.
Very relatable, very relatable.
Sarah Robinson from the Vermont Network, would you like to join us next? Thank you.
Another vertically challenged person. Share my screen, pull up. Thanks.
Makes me feel any better. My feet don't really touch the ground when my chair is. Yeah. What I do, the whole, yep.
You do it. All right, well, while I'm just getting my slides ready for you all, for the record, Sarah Robinson, I'm the co-executive director of the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. And I am very pleased to be with you here today to talk about H418. I'm gonna but a few of the things that Representative Arsenault just discussed with you all, but hopefully provide you with a little bit more context and detail about that. Let me open this up now and try one more time. Thank you for your patience, Sorsha. There we go. Okay. Hopefully this lets me present. There we go. Thank you for your patience. All right, because I haven't been to the committee yet this biennium, I think, I wanted to provide just the briefest of orientations to the Vermont Network and the coalition of providers across Vermont who serve victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking. We are a statewide nonprofit organization, and we have 15 member organizations who are also independent nonprofit organizations. The Vermont Network serves as the leading voice on issues of domestic and sexual violence statewide. We're very proud to represent these 15 member organizations that offer both life-saving services to victims of domestic and sexual violence and prevention programming in their communities. They offer services like a 24/7 hotline, emergency housing, legal advocacy, children's services, and much more. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, there are very few service providers these days in our state or elsewhere who truly offer 24-hour services. And so the workforce of advocates who work in these programs are truly nothing short of extraordinary, and you'll get to hear from a few of them in a few minutes. Last year in 2025, these organizations answered 23,000 hotline calls from Vermonters seeking support for issues related to domestic and sexual violence, and provided in-person support to about 8,000 Vermonters. As Representative Arsenault shared with you, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund was established by the General Assembly in 2008 and is set forth in 13 VSA 5360. The fund is established by, or is administered by the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, which is a quasi-state agency. The fund really serves as a primary revenue source for critically important services for victims, as well as systems which improve the public response to violence statewide. And the fund has been this, I would say, foundational resource for many of these organizations since its inception. The fund expenses have been relatively flat for the past 15 years, with some small exceptions. In FY26, the fund supported just over $1 million in expenses. And those expenses that come out of the fund include $627,000, which was distributed to the 15 member organizations of the Vermont Network. Those funds are distributed in accordance with a funding formula. So there's a formula that's used that distributes the funds based on the service area of the organization, the number of square miles, the population that is in the service area of those organizations, as well as the kinds of services that they provide. So for example, an organization that operates their own shelter receives more funds than an organization that does not. $90,000 of the fund also go out and are direct supports for survivors. So we're talking first, last month's rent, transportation expenses, truly the expenses that somebody needs to remove themselves from an unsafe situation and find themselves just a brief period of safety. And around $317,000 of the expenses are support statewide responses to violence, including the Vermont Council on Domestic Violence and the Deaf Vermonters Advocacy Services, which is a statewide program serving victims who are deaf or hard of hearing. But as you heard, despite the important purpose of the fund, there is a structural revenue problem with the fund. The revenues for the funds are comprised of two revenue sources. The first is a surcharge on criminal and civil judgments, and a portion of the marriage license fee. So there's a $47 surcharge on criminal and civil judgments that the court can levy, and $13.50 of that $47 currently goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. In addition, it's $80 for a marriage license in Vermont. I always like to say, you know somebody who might be considering getting married, please have them come to Vermont. Because $50 of their marriage license fee will go to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. The revenues in the fund have been in decline since 2015. And the reason for this decline, I know this committee has discussed this in years past, it's multifaceted, but much of it also has to do with policy decisions that the General Assembly has made around criminal justice reform, many of which we have supported. And also has to do with changes in policing. So if you look at data on, for example, traffic tickets, the number of individuals being pulled over and given traffic tickets has declined significantly over the past 10 years. And it has to do with changes in police practice. Courts will often also waive fees for people who are unable to pay. Again, something we support, but what it means is that there's fewer revenues going into the fund. And this has resulted in year-over-year deficits in the fund. There have been many efforts to address the health of the fund. First, there have been multiple reports and study committees. I know Representative Maslin, I think you maybe were on one of the first ones many years ago. In 2017, the marriage license fee was added as a revenue source for the fund in addition to court fines. In 2021, the legislature asked JFO to author a report on special funds supporting victims of crime. And the 2022 JFO report, which I'll submit to the committee just so that it's on your webpage again, provided really a detailed analysis of the health of the fund and provided some recommendations for possible revenue replacement. One of the recommendations of the report was to reallocate a portion of the court fines and fees that had previously been going to the general fund to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. And so before 2022, $725 of that $47 court fee was going to the general fund. And after 2022, the general fund allocation was split between the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund that we're discussing today and the Victims' Compensation Fund, which is another special fund. So now of that $47 surcharge, $13.50 goes to the DVSV fund. In addition, this body has increased the marriage license fee from $60 to $80 2 years ago to support the fund. That was an initial 2-year increase, and I'm sure many of you remember making that permanent not so long ago. So now of the $80 marriage fee, $50 goes to the fund. But despite these changes, we have not realized any increased revenue. In fact, there continue to be year-over-year deficits in the fund. I get monthly updates on the deposits that are coming into the fund because I want to know during the course of the year, is anything improving? Are these policy changes that we're making a difference? And I can unfortunately report that they are not. So this year we are again looking at a couple $100,000 deficit in the fund. And we have needed to go to the Appropriations Committee to ask for one-time general fund dollars every year. But we really need a new permanent revenue source that eliminates this annual instability and reliance on one-time funds. You'll hear in testimony later, but I'm sure that you can appreciate that our member organizations face a very uncertain fiscal environment right now. Certainly there's a shifting landscape on the federal level. Many of our member organizations are majority federally funded. Some of them, often the smallest, are up to 80 or 90% federally funded. And the instability on the federal level, when that's compounded by instability on the state level, creates kind of an untenable situation for many of these organizations to be able to really responsibly staff up, provide the services that are needed in their communities, and know that they're going to have resources come in every July 1. So that brings us to H418, which proposes a firearms and ammunition excise tax to support the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. Bless you. And this was one of the revenue options that was outlined by the Joint Fiscal Office in the 2022 report. And we can look to other states and to the federal government, who actually has an excise tax on firearms and has for a long time, for examples of how these taxes can work. But the point is, it's not a new or novel idea. Both California and Colorado have, in the past 5 years, passed excise taxes on firearms in order to fund anti-violence efforts and in order to fund organizations like ours. You'll be able to hear from one of my colleagues in Colorado shortly about how that has gone for them. The difficult reality is that there is an evidence-based connection between firearms and domestic violence. Here in Vermont, nearly half of all homicides in Vermont are domestic violence related, and the majority of those are committed with firearm. Every year, more than 700 American women are shot to death by intimate partners, and that's roughly 1 every 12 hours. And research indicates that when an abusive partner has access to guns, their partner is 5 times more likely to be killed than if they lived in a household where their partner did not have access to firearms. So at the same time that victims of violence are paying the price for firearms violence, the firearms industry is realizing record profits. The industry generates an estimated $91 billion in economic activity, according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation. There is public support for these investments. We know that here in Vermont, and we know that from how this is looked in other states. In a moment, you're going to hear more about the Colorado excise tax, but in Colorado, tax changes go to the ballot. And so there was a ballot measure that was supported by the majority of Coloradans. Here in Vermont, we know that there's very widespread support for investments in services for victims of domestic and sexual violence. In the 2025 Vermonter poll conducted by the Center for Rural Studies at UVM, over 90% of Vermonters said that it's important for Vermont to invest more resources in services for victims of domestic and sexual violence. So that really wraps it up for me. I just want to say thank you and really appreciate your attention to the bill and your consideration. I'm happy to take any questions you might have for me now, or if there are questions after other witnesses, I'm so happy to take those then.
Yeah, Representative Meslin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm remembering, and you can correct me, from way back when, the other times that we've looked at this, that one of the connections has been if we increase the add-on to traffic tickets sometimes, that some people aren't able to pay them anyway.
That's right.
And so on paper, we think we're doing a good thing, but we don't succeed. Thank you.
Yes, I think that is a very fair statement. And I think that for, again, a lot of good reasons, courts have become more practiced in waiving those fees. And the reality is, and you'll probably hear this from other witnesses, people who are involved in the justice system are on average can include low-income folks. And we know that, I mean, we fundamentally just don't believe that victim services should be paid for on the backs of people that are involved in the criminal justice system. And so we do think, yeah, an alternate revenue source is needed.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The question basically an answer from the table, so that we all.
Appreciate it.
So you were imagining that Elizabeth Newman would go next and then, okay, great.
But your show.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us from Colorado.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah.
Great. Well, good afternoon, members of the committee, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Elizabeth Newman. I am the Director of Public Policy for the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We are the statewide membership organization in Colorado that represents survivor voices and the programs and agencies that serve them. And CICASA was one of 4 organizations that worked on the legislation and ballot measure to enact a firearm and ammunition excise tax in order to help address the funding crisis for victim service providers in our state. CICASA and our members, along with our sibling coalitions representing domestic violence programs, all crime victims, and child advocacy centers, began this effort in 2023 as we continued to face reductions in federal Victims of Crime Act funds and no longer had American Rescue Plan Act or COVID relief dollars to fill that gap. In Colorado, we also have a unique fiscal requirement referred to as the Taxpayers Bill of Rights, or TABOR, which requires the state to limit budget growth and give back revenue that exceeds the annual cap. It also requires voters to approve any new taxes. And this puts a significant strain on our state budget, even in good years. And so we have had no ongoing state funding for these services and rely heavily on federal funding. We started looking into generating a state revenue source to address the decreasing federal funding that we've been seeing since 2018. And we worked closely with our legislative champions to consider a range of options. We found that Coloradans were pretty much taxed out on many items such as alcohol and cannabis. We looked at fees and sales taxes as well. Ultimately, the most common sense approach for us was firearms and ammunition because of the nexus between the item being taxed and the purpose of the revenue and the fact that there was not a state tax on those items. We looked into the constitutional issues of taxing something that is protected as a right, and found that the federal excise tax on firearms had been in place for more than 100 years without issue. And lawyers agreed, and we moved forward with a proposal through the legislature to then refer to the ballot an excise tax on manufacturing, dealing, and selling of firearms, gun parts, and ammunition. As I mentioned TABOR earlier, so this did also have to be approved by voters. So after passing through the House and Senate, we did begin a voter campaign. And based on polling, we knew that the majority of households in Colorado are gun owners themselves. And so we would need at least some voters to agree to tax themselves. And ultimately, voters did. We had very little money to run a statewide ballot measure campaign. And so we relied heavily on voter education through the media. We highlighted the need for these services and the importance of shifting the cost of violence in our communities from victims to the companies who are making a profit from it. And the measure passed at 54% in November 2024 and went into effect in April 2025. There has been a lawsuit filed immediately upon the tax taking effect. However, there is no stay. There has not been any movement on the case. The tax remains in effect and the funds are coming in at this critical time when resources continue to drop and the need from victims and survivors has increased. We anticipate that the funds will start being fully released in 2027. And for Colorado, this is a huge benefit as this new source of funding has greater stability for our nonprofit budgets, as well as greater flexibility to provide programming and services not typically funded, such as mortgage assistance or prevention programming. I would be happy to answer any questions if the committee has them, but I do also thank you for your time today and wish you best of luck.
Thank you very much. Any quick questions? Thank you very much for zooming in and joining us, and I hope you wish you well. Thanks. Next up, we have Donna Mackelmer, if you want to join us.
Definitely want to join you. And in keeping with the commentary on the seat, I was always the divot in my kindergarten photo. So and I am not the divot today. Thank you for your time and your work and your attention. So for the record, my name is Donna Mackelmer, and I am the legal advocate at the Women's Freedom Center The Women's Freedom Center serves victims of domestic and sexual violence throughout Windham County and in southern Windsor County. We are opening a brand new shelter for domestic and sexual violence survivors just this past month in Springfield. So we're very excited about that. Our organization provides a 24-hour hotline, emergency shelter, safety planning, legal advocacy, support during sexual assault exams, and many, many forms of community outreach. The Women's Freedom Center has been serving our community for 5 decades. Despite our strength as an organization, each year we contend with deficits in the state fund that supports our work, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. The special fund is a crucial foundation for our work in Windham and southern Windsor counties and the work of organizations like ours all across Vermont. As you have heard today, the revenues in the Domestic and Sexual Special Fund have been declining for years. This has led to year-over-year instability in this fund. At the same time, our field is facing unprecedented uncertainty on the federal level, and you can understand that. Serious and structural changes to the revenue sources for the fund are overdue and they're needed now. For these reasons, we strongly support H418, which would create an excise tax on firearms and ammunition to fund the Domestic and Sexual Violence Fund. I'm going to go off script for just one moment and say, I so appreciate the brilliance that brings this bill to the fore today. And sometimes the solution to a problem is embedded in the very geography of the challenges we face. So it is with this issue, much in the way that jewelweed, for the gardeners in the room, grows near poison ivy and can eliminate the unpleasant consequences. This bill offers us a similar opportunity. So I thank you for envisioning such possibility. The instability in this fund is, of course, difficult for our organization to manage each year. But there is another more direct cost of this instability, which has an impact on everyday Vermonters. The Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund distributes nearly $100,000 statewide in direct support to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And how do we do that? We use this funding to meet essential emergency needs, such as food, utilities. We keep the lights on. We give track phones, which cannot be tracked. Transportation costs. We have an amazing mechanic who fixes every survivor's car and only charges us for parts. He is just incredible, has never charged for labor. And so these funds also help us cultivate essential relationships with our community members. There are very few flexible resources for survivors of violence in our state, and the Domestic and Sexual Fund is one of them. Advocacy organizations such as the Women's Freedom Center believe that adequate funding is crucial to the safety and the well-being of our families, our neighbors, our friends, and the community at large. Our legislature created and has supported the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund in recognition of the critical role that we play across the state in supporting survivors and breaking the cycle of violence. It is time that we fix the fund to ensure that these services remain strong in our communities. And I thank you so much for the work that you do and for your kind attention at the time of day that is really hard to pay kind attention.
Thank you very much, Donna. Really appreciate your time. Yes. Adelaide Lanning, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. For the record, my name is Ava Loy Lanning. No, that's all right. That you are not the first.
No, but
that's for sure. I am the executive director of New Story Center in Rutland, and I'm very pleased to be with you this afternoon to talk about H418. New Story Center is the trusted community partner serving victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, and stalking in Rutland County. Our team of 8 amazing, incredible women advocates to provide emergency shelter. We have 15 shelter beds, and crisis response, legal advocacy, housing support, and prevention education. We are available 24/7 through our crisis hotline. In FY25, we served 758 survivors and their children. To sustain this level of service to our community, our small but incredibly mighty team depends on stable and predictable funding. In FY26, News Story Center received just over $45,000 from the DVSV special fund. And while modest, these funds are critical. And knowing that we have stable and sustainable funding helps keep us going day after day, and helps me to support the advocates in our organization that are doing such amazing work. Domestic and sexual violence issues are often heard in the judiciary or in human services committees, but your committee has a critical role to play in ensuring that survivors in Rutland County and in every county in the state of Vermont has access to the services they need. This is because we rely on the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund to do our work. I'm here today to share with you why I think that H418 deserves your thorough and detailed consideration. The fines and fees currently supporting our work are both unjust and insufficient. And I say unjust because a system that relies on individuals being involved in the criminal justice system, just while I think in theory and originally sounds like a great idea, right? But what we know is that many people, if not most, involved in the criminal justice system are people who are living in poverty. And we also know that many of them are victims themselves. Also, those revenues have been on decline, as you've heard. And so we would like to ask for you to make sure that we have the sustainable funding that we need. I also want to share with you that growing up in Texas, I'm a 7th generation Texan. Vermont is my home now. Firearms were a normal and respected part of my everyday life. My grandfather, my granddaddy, taught me how to shoot when I was very young. I learned to shoot with a .22 rifle, a little lever action Winchester that's been in my family since the late 1890s. And it lives with me in Vermont now. That little .22 that I learned to shoot with. I hunted with my family. I competed on my 4-H rifle team. And those experiences shaped my belief, as well as my grandfather always grounding every lesson I ever had in safety, responsibility, and a deep respect for gun ownership. Those experiences continue to shape my belief that H418 is not punishing gun owners. It's about honoring a tradition of responsibility while ensuring survivors of violence have a stable lifeline to safety and support. We all want that. I can't believe that there is a gun owner in Vermont, a responsible gun owner in Vermont, that would feel differently. I believe that they would want all of the victims and survivors that we work with to have safe and stable services that help them build a life free from violence. Our team at News Story remains deeply committed to our community, to our mission, and to the survivors we serve. We're grateful for the policy support we've received from the Vermont legislature year after year. You've enacted so many laws that help keep survivors, victims and survivors safe, and help them move on to a life where they can write their news story free from violence. Now we need to ask you to look at new ways for us to fund the DV and SB special fund. So that we can continue our work directly with survivors, so that I can continue to support my brilliant and empathetic staff. And receiving one-time funds for small amounts across 14 programs around the state is just not tenable. And we look to you at this table to help us fix this broken fiscal policy and create more reliable and sustainable funding. I thank you all very much for allowing me the time to speak with you today and for your careful consideration of this bill.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions they'd like to ask of any of the witnesses that came while we have a moment? Okay. Yeah. Representative Holcomb.
I'm just curious about the 10%, how that was the number that was identified, and is that, how does that line up with the need?
Sarah, do you want to, come back and speak to that?
As I'm sure you are very familiar with, one of the things we love doing is looking at what other states have done. So when California passed their excise tax, they passed an 11% excise tax. That is where Colorado also started with theirs. I don't know if Elizabeth is still on, but I believe that they ultimately landed on 6.5. We have done a bunch of internal analysis at our organization about the expenses of the fund. We really believe that it ought to be supporting at least $5 million in expenses. We also know that it's not possible for that, certainly not in the current fiscal moment, to be absorbed by the general fund. And so that had us looking for alternate revenue sources. So that's where the percentage comes from. We know we've now been able to see that play out in California. We're starting to see it play out in year one in Colorado and see the revenues that are coming in there. So it gave us kind of a sense of scale.
Before you go. So thank you for coming in. And I'm not sure that I trust us to maintain a fund with our previous conversations earlier today. Just wondering about your other sources of funding. A lot of it is federal. So, and you showed about $1 million in expenses. Does that match up to your revenues? Is it, how far are you short?
Great questions. So both the Vermont Network, my organization, and the 15 member organizations that we represent, they are, the vast majority of their funding is state or federal. For most of them, they are majority federally funded. And that those are funds that come primarily from the U.S. Department of Justice through the Violence Against Women Act and the Department for Health and Human Services. And there's been a lot of instability with those funds currently. We've been on, many rounds of freezes and delays of those funds. But there are also some state dollars that our member organizations access. For example, organizations who operate shelters receive some funding through the Department for Children and Family Office on Economic Opportunity to help support their shelter operations. So it's really a blend of different resources. So that was one of your questions. In terms of how short we are, it varies by year, but I mentioned earlier that I try to get monthly updates from the Center for Crime Victim Services in terms of what the deposits are looking like month to month that come into the fund. So we're looking at each month, how far off are we from where we know the fund balance needs to be on July 1 for the fund to be able to pay out. So right now we are at, of that, $1 million, we're have about a $350,000 to $400,000 projected deficit. So we're at, maybe if we're lucky, 2/3 of those funds are coming in through the existing revenues. And so it's the same reason why at this moment we have some folks downstairs in appropriations asking for one-time dollars to help fill those holes. And we've been doing that every year for the past many years. As I'm sure you can very much appreciate, it's hard for providers who are offering 24-hour services and a bit demoralizing to have to come back every single year and ask to be level funded, because that's really what it's meant. We're not asking for more. We haven't asked for more in a very long time. We're asking to not be cut. So that's where the conversation has been, and that's why we really feel like it's time to change that conversation.
All right, thanks.
Do you have any statistics on gun and ammunition sales over time in Vermont? And because my thought is like, how stable is this funding source if we were to go this direction?
We have looked into that a bit. I don't have it with me, and so I'd be happy to follow up with the committee on that. But we do know that over the past 10 years, and the past, especially kind of 2018 to now, there have been considerable accelerations in purchases of guns and ammunition. And we do know, we have a lot of national data about that as well. But there is some Vermont specific data that I can follow up with you about.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate yours. So folks, we are headed to the floor, and then we're back here tomorrow morning at 9. As I said, we're likely gonna have testimony after lunch tomorrow as well. The H577, I don't know why I could not find that amongst just the only 4 bills over there. They're Emily Byrne and Jen Carby are just like working on a few commas, and we weren't able to have them back in just because of other people's schedules. And so I'm going to try to squeeze that in tomorrow if possible, and might not be able to, but it is, if anyone has any concerns about voting tomorrow, please let me know before tomorrow. And with that, we are done.